Hi, everyone. Michael Rubino, your host of Mold Talks. Today, we have a very special guest, Laura Lynn Knight. Laura, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day here to be with us and share your story. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So the question really is what path did you go down to figure out that mold was a problem, and what was that path like?
Oh, the path of mold. I can kind of chuckle now because we're past it, but the truth is that the chuckle is also because it's so traumatizing, right? The path of mold is so hard and it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking and it manifests in such confusing ways and it is a confusing path in my experience. But we lived in a very nice home in California, and one night my daughter came into our bedroom and she was just screaming with anxiety. She was 5 years old and just like in a total panic attack. And she had had little bouts of anxiety, but nothing that we couldn't help her with. I'm a parenting educator by trade. I'm an author of parenting books. I teach meditation and mindfulness. So, my wheelhouse is really in that kind of work. And I was always able to help guide her. And then on this occasion, it was just so far out of the realm of what was normal. And so we connected with her pediatrician and a psychiatrist, and they thought maybe it was PANS, which is a neurological disease. And no one was really sure. And they just said, sometimes kids at 5 years old, they just start having anxiety like this. But I really felt like I had enough experience with my own daughter and with other kids. I was also an elementary school teacher for a long time. I'm like, no, I don't buy it. This just isn't normal. I can't just accept that, all of a sudden, with no trauma and no of any of the other signs, she just suddenly has horrible, debilitating anxiety to the point where she can't go to school and she can't sleep and all this is happening. And so, by way of many people, I connected with a functional medicine doctor who said, let's test her for mold. And her levels came back so high. She had so much
Wow.
mold in her body. And then we all tested, my whole family tested. I have a son too that's older, and my husband and I, and we all had mold. And then we tested our house, and there was mold behind every wall in our house.
Wow.
And, in the beginning, I said we lived in a beautiful house because I just think it's important to know it didn't smell. It wasn't what you think of when you think of a moldy home. There was nothing that looked wrong with our house at all, but it was just covered in mold.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really important to dive into that because, I most of the homes that I walk into, they're immaculate, they're well kept, they're beautiful, they're well maintained, but there are issues going on behind what you can actually see. And that's really where the problems lie. And, there are so many intricate parts to a home that we have to maintain that, as human beings, it's natural for us to forget about or not think about, or heck, even when we buy a home, and we do all this work to it and we make it ours, nobody tells us things like, hey, make sure you check your roof every year, or check your windows and doors every year, so
Yes.
things happen, right? But, I want to take a step back for a second because I'm very curious. When this doctor first said, let's check you guys for mold, what was going through your head?
I am I'm a researcher and I have always been in the world of functional medicine and nutrition and holistic, alternatives. So in my mind, it wasn't so out of the realm to test her for mold, but I never would have thought of it on my own. So I was really grateful, actually. Thank you. This could be a possible solution. Yes, let's check her immediately. And we did. And I want to just add to that too, once we treated her for the mold, in case we don't get to this part in the story, because I feel like I could skip over it. Once we treated her for the mold, her anxiety significantly dissipated. I
Wow.
mean, just so much so that she's well regulated and she went back to school and she can do all of the things that were inhibiting her. And some of that's because we used mindfulness tools and somatic based tools and different things that we need to regulate the nervous system. But a huge component of that was actually just getting rid of the mold in her body. And
Wow.
we did retest her and she is clear of mold now.
That's amazing. No, and it's always great to hear these stories because, when you go out there and you read on the blogs and things of that nature or Facebook groups, you always
Mhm.
hear these horror stories, right? And it's like, I had mold and I have this debilitating illness, but you don't really hear, once people get better, they leave. They don't really
Yeah.
come back and share their story. And for so many people that are struggling right now and they're listening to this podcast because they're, trying to connect the dots, they
Mhm.
need to hear that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's really important. I'm
Yes.
glad that you connected the dots pretty early on and have done your research and homework, because for most people, when they hear the word mold the first time, they're like, nah, can't be mold. There's
Yeah.
no mold in my place. There's this negative connotation or stigma on this,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
unfortunately, it shouldn't be so negative. It's part of our ecosystem. It naturally occurs in our environment, and so it's very easy for it to occur in our homes, especially if we don't know what we're looking for. So it's really important just to come at this with an open mind, get the results, and then we have scientific information to be able to pinpoint, is it at home? Is it at work? Is it in my
Mhm.
body? What is happening here? And I think that's really important to kind of tie that together.
Absolutely. And if I backtrack even a little bit for before that, when my son was born, he had really bad asthma. I mean, really bad asthma. And I took him to a million different practitioners and, tried all different sorts of Western and Eastern and different types of medicine. And actually, a naturopath suggested that we had mold in our house. He said, you should check your house for mold. He didn't suggest checking the body, but we checked the house for mold. But I did an air test, and the air, sometimes air tests can be accurate, but we also know that some molds are heavier and they fall more quickly, and you can't capture them in an air test. And for whatever reason, we got inaccurate results. So I dismissed the idea that we had mold in our house. And it wasn't until all of this happened years
Mm.
later, and then we had the house tested, you can actually see the half-life of mold. And we could see that some of the molds in our house had been there for at least 20 years. So I know it was there, but unfortunately it wasn't caught.
Yeah, and that's why I love dust test technology these days,
Yes.
because it's a much more useful way to screen what you're actually being exposed to. Air testing only really picks up like a 3 foot radius. And the
Yes.
interesting thing about air testing is it actually only picks up isolated spores,
Mhm.
right? So if you have spores that are in your dust, they've already settled, they've been created and settled in your dust, they're now bound with your dust. The dust is not going to fit into the slide.
Mhm.
So you're missing all of that information. And obviously, if you ever sat on a couch on a sunny day in front of a window and you saw that ray of light peek through, you know that our dust is everywhere and we're breathing it in actively. I'm breathing in dust right now. I think it's
Mhm.
really important for people to know that, because if we start with our dust, then work backwards from there to figure out where it's coming from, we're going to be a lot more successful in understanding, do I have mold? And then how do I take care of it? So I'm assuming you had to have gone through some sort of remediation project.
Oh, we did. Yes. We were actually, I mean, I don't know if fortunate is the word, but during the time that all of this happened, we coincidentally happened to be doing a small kitchen renovation. So we had gotten a rental house and we were going to be out of our house for about a month or two at the most. So luckily, when we got our tests back, we were already out, and then we had an environmental consultant come over, and he is there, of course, to pinpoint where the mold might be, because in most homes you can't open up all the drywall. But he came over, and since we were under construction, he could open up all the drywall. And we just literally kind of looked around, and he used his technology that he uses that I'm not really familiar with, but
Sure.
we would go from wall to wall and it would be like, okay, I think we have mold here, and I think we have mold here, and I think we have mold here. And we would take the drywall out because we could. And every time there was mold behind it.
Wow. So you
So yeah, then, and just to answer the question, yes, then our house was completely, it turned into over a year of a remediation that was done on our house, so
wow,
that it was, certified clean and completely wiped down and all new drywall put back in,
done the correct way.
done the correct way.
As you realize, this can be an expensive process doing things correctly. A lot of it is a lot of it is just the way our systems are set up, the way our buildings are built. It makes it pretty difficult, right? And obviously that changes things from an accessibility standpoint. We definitely need major change, right? We need regulations around this. We need more education around this, more awareness around this. But nonetheless, I'm very fortunate to hear that you guys, it all worked out in God's plan to get you
Yes.
all these issues resolved and fixed so that you guys can get back in. And how long did it take after, getting out of that for you to notice the difference?
So for my daughter, it was almost immediate. So we found out she had mold. We had already moved out, so we luckily weren't in the source. And then we started her on hydroxyzine, and hydroxyzine can actually be used as an anti-anxiety medication. It's also an antihistamine, but it also works really well for people who have mast cell activation syndrome. And as you probably know, mast cell activation syndrome and mold go hand in hand because we're so inflamed and then we're so sensitive to histamines. So that she didn't take it for long, but she took that coupled with nystatin, which is a binder that you can use. And so for her, I noticed almost immediate results. It's like we
Wow.
started her on the hydroxyzine, we started the nystatin, and within days and weeks, she was completely better. For other members of our household, like for me, I couldn't tolerate nystatin. I have so much more mold because I was living in it for a lot longer than she was.
Right.
And so I have to use other binders, more gentle binders, same with my son. So we're not totally free and clear yet, but a lot of the symptoms have been cleared up.
That's amazing. Well, with that being said, I think kind of an important little disclaimer is because usually when a medication is said, people are jotting it down,
Oh,
they're
yeah,
going running to
yeah.
get it. But different things and different
Absolutely.
combinations work differently for folks. As you just
Hmm.
mentioned, that particular product worked well for your daughter, not as so well for you or your son. I think it's important that people remember that medicine is really individualized, and
Hmm.
just because something works well for somebody doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work well for you. Certainly, more ideas and things that you have to try is always great, but you just want people to know that, because I know people just
Yes,
hear something and start going to take it right away. And you highlighted
totally.
that point, how it wasn't as effective for you guys. So I
Well,
think
and
that's
it's
really
really
great.
important too, as we look at medications, as we consult with our doctor to really see how, for her it really worked. For me, it made me feel so much worse because I was just inflaming my body even more. And so mold is really tricky because it does need to bind to something. And we know that, it's both water and fat soluble. So it's working its way through the body, but never actually excreting the body like other toxins. So we know that we need it to bind onto something in order for it to be eliminated. But what that binder is very individualized. That's a really good
Yeah.
point.
That's awesome. And, obviously this was a very traumatic situation for you guys at the time. And, how did you work through some of that trauma to get through the other side of it? Because, that's a big thing. And the amount of trauma that this can cause, both just from a health perspective, financial perspective, it can lead to some dark times, right? And I think any insight you can give on how you dealt with that trauma and how your family dealt with that trauma could be helpful to others.
It is. It is very traumatic, and it's financially traumatic. It's emotionally traumatic. I actually created a whole website. It's called Hope from Mold, and I just launched it. I have a free ebook on there that really outlines kind of what we did and our process and different foods and, kind of all the stuff that we're talking about today here and testing and all of that. But I also incorporate a lot of mindfulness tools and a lot of somatic based tools. And I talk about how you on your own can practice, meditation and mindfulness and gratitude. And they're the things that we hear about. We hear about self care, we hear about meditation, and it can seem really fluffy sometimes or something that might work for you, but it's not going to work for me. At the end of the day, though, science tells us that it does calm our nervous system down and it does calm the brain down and it helps regulate the body. And so when I'm bringing tools like that in, then I make space in myself to find a therapist or to help my daughter with her fears when they come up or her fears around mold. We we ended up moving, and in the new house, it's like, okay, is there mold in this house? And how do you not know? And, all of the questions, or how do you know? And how do you answer her questions about, is mold safe outside but not inside? And so it really comes back to like regulating the body and the nervous system so that all the other deeper healing can take place.
No, that's really important. I think, meditation and then other mindfulness techniques that people do, are very, very, very effective. I did my first meditation with Deepak Chopra, which was, really cool experience. But it
Wow.
made me realize that, I don't ever stop and take a second to just sit still and, manifest or think about what I want to create. Because, as human beings, we get so busy and we're kind of skirting around town trying to make things happen. Even when you're not sick, even when you are sick, I should say, you're using every possible last attenuation unit that you have, to try to get better, to do research, to do these things. And sometimes we just need to take a second to relax, right? And I think that's
Yes.
really important. So that was one of the really cool things that happened to me in this past year, that I realized,
Wow.
this is really, really important stuff. And I don't think people are paying too much attention to this. So I think that's great that you highlight that. And when you get your ebook and go on your website, you get to experience some of these techniques that you offer.
Absolutely. So much of what I share is kind of, here are other case studies, here are other people similar to what you're doing, here are other people that have gone through this. This is how they got through it. These are tools that help them. And let's incorporate these calming tools that I can really guide people through, because it is traumatic and it is hard and we feel lost in it, and we don't necessarily have the time to be researching, mindfulness tools or what exactly should I be doing. But I feel like if I have it laid out in front of me, I also have a parenting website that if I have, for parents that are helping their kids with this, because whole families are affected, it's like I want the tools right in front of me so that I know how to create that calm and maintain it.
Can we dive in a little bit about some of the trauma that happens in kids? I have two kids myself. I know many families have children and are dealing with this whole situation of having to move and, take all their stuff and remediate or what have you, right? Different scenarios for different families here. But I guess the question is, how do you deal with that? The kids are going to ask questions, right? You're throwing out some of your kids' favorite toys, in certain circumstances, and they're going to ask a lot of questions. They're not feeling well, possibly, but they don't understand why. And there's
Yeah,
a lot, and it's very heartbreaking, and I'm
it
sure that
is.
I'm sure even when you go through that, even personally, it's just a difficult time to go through. Would
Yeah.
love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. It is. It's so difficult. And if you're sick too, and your child is sick, then you're trying to help your child and you don't feel well. And we know as parents, like even on our best days, when we're feeling good and we're not sick and we're healthy, even on those days, parenting is hard. So on the days when you're at low energy or you feel nauseous or whatever your ailments are, on top of parenting, it just can feel like such a internal battle sometimes. And then you really want to support your child because also, like you said, they have fears, and it's like, why do we have to move? And can we keep those stuffed animals that are really important to me? And what is mold? And where am I going to get it? And how do I get rid of it? And so I always try to answer children's questions in the most age appropriate way that I can, while also just sticking to the facts of, there, this is what mold is. It's outside, but it can get inside of the walls. This is how it got inside of the walls of our house. And then we breathe it in. And now we're going to we're going to do everything we can to get it out of our bodies. And sometimes we don't feel well when that happens, but you're going to get better, giving them that hope, that light at the end of the tunnel. And then when their feelings arise, coming back to some of those tools, maybe it's helping them trace their hand so that they're having a somatic based mindfulness experience and they're regulating their body and their breath while they're doing that. Perhaps it is coloring pictures of their feelings and letting them express how they're feeling that way. For older kids, it can be writing in a journal, whatever the tool is that you find helpful for your child. And if they need outside help, then absolutely, looking into that. Sometimes kids need someone else to talk to, especially if the whole family has been really sick.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to highlight too, because it's how do you have these conversations? You have to have them. I mean, kids are really smart. I've noticed that with my own kids. Like it is fascinating, like what how their minds operate. I mean, sometimes I'm able to have a very adult conversation with my 7-year old. Right? He really does understand some complex concepts that I had no idea he would understand at this age. So I think developing these conversations and how to have these conversations and letting them, because kids need to feel safe, they need security, right? And so letting them know that while these are unsettling times, we're dealing with it. This is the way to deal with that, and you are safe. We're going to make sure that you're safe. And I think that's really, I know that's been the key for me with my kids, and hopefully that can help raise some
Yeah.
insight for other folks who have to deal with this. I mean, it's really heartbreaking some of the stuff that you have to kind of do throughout this process.
It is. It is heartbreaking, and the good thing is though that kids, they have a certain amount of resiliency, and what they truly need at the end of the day is to know that they're loved and that they have a sense of belonging within the home. And as us as parents, as we continue to send them those messages of safety that you talked about, of healing, of hope, we find times to have one-on-one time with them where we're just building with Legos, we're baking cookies. We want to just keep as many routines in place, even if we have to move out of our house. Keep the family routines, keep the family traditions, because the stuff can come and go, the places can change, but if you are consistent as a parent and you keep showing up in the same way, they are going to be okay.
That's amazing advice. I really appreciate that. Let's talk about the website. So you started an entire new website, really dedicated to mold. What sparked that idea, and what can people learn from it?
So I have my main website is my name, Laura Lynn Knight, Linn, and that is where I have all my parenting tools and resources. And I'm a parenting educator. I wrote a book called Break Free from Reactive Parenting. It actually has a lot of the mindfulness tools and the somatic tools that we were just talking about. But as I got more and more into my work, I had families that would reach out to me and say, "Hey, I heard that you had mold in your house, and my kids, I think they have mold because they're acting out in these particular ways, and we're not sure. Can you tell us more?" And always, so far to date, every family that has reached out to me that has gotten their house tested for mold or their children tested for mold, it has come back positive. They actually did have mold. And it was just like everywhere, right? All these stories about mold and kids being affected and families being sick. And I just felt like I need to give a voice to this, because when I was out there doing my own research, I could only find heavy textbooks. And I personally do not like a lot of heavy textbooks. I can kind of read them, but I like to hear stories of hope. I want to know what other people did. I'm more relational in that way of just like, what did you do? Tell me more. So the website is really just a home for tools and resources that I wish that I had known then, but I know now that I can share. And so again, that's hopefrommold.com.
That's amazing. So for those listening, please check out hopefrommold.com for some of the amazing resources that are on there. Laura, really appreciate you creating that. As an author myself, and an educator in this space from a remediation standpoint, uh, there's just not enough really good information out there, and I think it's really important because there's a whole 360 that happens here, right? You need inspection, you need to find a good inspector, you need remediation, you need to find a good remediator, but you also need to deal with the trauma aspects, the financial aspects, the emotional aspects. It can be overwhelming, of course, and the reason that is that way because there's just not enough good resources of how to make the right decision from all angles.
Yes.
So appreciate you putting that together for folks. I think that's really great.
Well, thank you. I appreciate what you're doing. This is so important. I wish I had known about you when I was going through all of what I was going through, but now I know, and we can send people your way because we need it. We need this resource.
Absolutely. There's it's a big industry. There's 50,000 companies that remediate. And if they even follow the standards, which is probably a small percentage of that,
Yeah.
even the standards don't go as far enough to really tackle this from a health perspective. We have an organism, we have particles and toxins created by that organism. The particles and toxins piece is pretty much not even spoken about in the industry, and it's really just, oh, let's remove some drywall and things of that nature. So you obviously went through the right process. You cleaned the entire home after. You were looking at both sides of the coin here, and not everybody does. And I think that's where people get
Yeah.
hurt and have this coined concept of failed remediation because they just don't know.
Yes, it's true. There's such a lack of information. And I recently moved to another state and I was so surprised because when I moved here, I bought a new house and I wanted to get a mold test done before I moved in. And, just even as I called around and looked for places, it was like I could only find air testing. Like
Yeah.
I swear, like nobody does ERMI tests here. And there's so many misconceptions of like, oh, well, if you have mold, you can just move out of the house and then it won't be in your body anymore. Just like if you're allergic to cat dander, you can just not have a cat and you won't be allergic. And it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, no, that's not the way it works. And
Yeah.
so we do need to give that voice and that information so that we can make educated decisions.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't run from mold like you can from a cat.
I
It's
know, I
a
wish.
little bit of a misconception there. Well, for future reference, you should check out the dusttest.com. It's like Ermi, and basically it ships right to your door. You can do it yourself. So you save some money on hiring an inspector in the future and be able to just
Yes.
sample it, get the data you need to make that decision. But glad we're connected now and can be a resource for you and vice versa. I mean, the resources that you share are invaluable and are definitely extremely helpful for folks with families that are going through this. Like I said, it's traumatic, and it's obviously having those resources makes the road traveled a lot easier.
Yes, there is hope. There is hope, and there are tools and resources, and we just have to keep banding together and supporting one another.
Are there any other social media platforms or anything that you're on that people can follow you and stay tuned as all the new developments you're working on?
Yeah, if you go on any of the social media platforms and just type Laura Lynn Linn Knight with a Knight, you will find me. I also have a lot of just articles online too, where you can just Google me and find resources that way.
That's so awesome, Laura. Really appreciate it. Everyone, Laura Lynn Knight, definitely check her out. Really appreciate you joining us here today. It was very insightful, very helpful, and I know the resources you offer will definitely be very helpful for folks. So thank you for taking time out of your busy day and meeting here with me and sharing this good information.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.